I wanted to do a quick video about some of the things that I've observed recently in a review of, let's say, a couple of IEPs. And I think that this is important for parents to be mindful of. Um, and I hate to say that it's intentionally deceptive or that schools are doing this to sit there and trick parents. Some do. Others, it's just sort of a an act of ignorance or just um, it's good intent. It's not purposeful, but I'd have to say in most situations that I've come across, it would be difficult for me to say that it's accidental because it sure as hell looks intentional. And what is it that I'm talking about? Guys, there's been many instances to where, let's say, a parent goes into an IEP meeting and they don't believe that their child is receiving sufficient services and specifically specific services. Let's just use ABA therapy as an example, okay? And with regards to ABA therapy, or let's say applied behavior analysis, all right, that runs the gambit, guys, of a bunch of different strategies, therapies, approaches that can be used, all right? So people throw out the term ABA therapy and you don't really know what they're talking, and so therefore it lends credence to a lot of misunderstandings because people already have their perceived definition of what that means. What does ABA mean? And so for a school system, this is exactly the problem as well. What is the perception of the staff when a parent brings up that, hey, I think my child requires ABA therapy in their IEP program in order for them to receive a free, appropriate public education? All right. Now, I can tell you time and time again where once I get involved and once I sort of start having discussions with not only the parent but with the school staff, in working through these issues, I end up finding out a lot of the times that the disconnect is in definitions. They're both using the same word. They're both using the word ABA therapy, for example. But the perception of the parent and what they're requesting as opposed to the perception and how they're defining that on the school side aren't necessarily lined up the same way. Okay, like I said, applied behavior analysis runs the gambit. It's like a spectrum of peer-reviewed, scientifically based strategies, therapies, and approaches in dealing with or addressing skill acquisition and or behavior reduction concerns for children with autism or other developmental disabilities, okay? And so within that family or that spectrum of therapies or strategies, you got anywhere from what I would consider the most, if you want to use the word intrusive, I don't really like that word, but one that is heavily weighted toward being teacher or therapist driven or teacher or therapist initiated. And that would be the discrete trial training. All right, DTT. And so in that regard, that would be sort of your starting point here. And then you got the other things, pivotal response training, social stories, those kind of things that are tend to be, this far apart from discrete trial training. And so there's a very, I'm not going to say a small grouping of kids, but there are a classification of kids, so to speak, that would benefit from discrete trial training because of the child's inability or consistent ability to initiate, let's say, a back and forth with regards to a teacher-student type of response. And so when you're at that starting point of trying to make that social interaction or that human interaction, which is normal or normal in the way that our society would define it, of that learning experience or that social communication experience, then at that point, yes, you need to have a starting point, and you need to have goals wrapped into, let's say, that that interaction. And for many of our kids, especially starting preschool age and a little older, sometimes it does need to be teacher or therapist initiated and driven with regards to a lot of that rote or repetitious learning, which would be just more in line with discrete trial training, which would also be heavy on the side of data collection, but also heavy on the side of a requirement for training in order to initiate that correctly, patiently, so that we are trying to achieve the goal of skill acquisition. And, and it usually falls in line with that goal of reducing behavior, because so many times those early years also come with it communication difficulties, which a lot of behavior is tied to lack of communication. So therefore you find alternatives way to communicate, which may be maladaptive, may not be appropriate with regards to that interaction, but humans communicate. And if they can't communicate in traditional fashion, then they will find other ways to communicate their displeasure, their wants, needs, or whatever. So this is where on these kind of fronts, it seems like very basic, nonsensical type of no crap Sherlock type of knowledge, guys, but a lot of this stuff with a lot of people that don't have sort of a foundation in these type of areas, these are harder concepts for them to sort of grasp. Why does that kid act like that? And this is where that training is so critical, because otherwise, guys, you're going to be hitting some thresholds for some patients when in reality, that training helps equip the paraprofessional or the teacher or the RBT or the behavior analyst with a requisite kind of understanding, which then contributes to a broadening of somebody's patience and understanding what our goal is and what we're trying to accomplish. But then not only that is seeing it work, seeing that it is having an impact, and you're seeing a reduction in the child's behavior while you're seeing an increase in the child's skills. And that is the entire goal of applied behavior analysis. So now that I provided that background, what happens when you go to your school and you say, my child requires this type of intervention in order for them to receive a free and appropriate public education? Now, at that point, because the school, a lot of them go, oh my God, the parents are asking for a LOVAS type discrete trial approach or ABA approach. With some kids, that's absolutely true. With others, it's not that. The school is misinterpreting what the parent is saying. So part of the responsibility is on the parent to properly communicate what kind of therapeutic approach or strategy that they're that they're talking about. And if they don't know, then by God, get an expert in there that is, let's say, a board certified behavior analyst or a licensed behavior analyst that could properly observe the situation and make those recommendations to the IEP team as to what strategy or therapy or approach would be best suited for the child based upon the science. Easy solutions, but so many times that's where the parents hit the roadblock or the obstacle in not even getting the school to agree to bring this type of expert in when they're so critical to the proper function of an IEP team. So, with that, I have no pity whatsoever for a school system that continues to chase its tail and not face the reality of the 21st century, that behavior analytics is a proven field, proven science. It should be a mainstay on within any school system with regards to select children that require that hat to be a member of the IEP team, similar to an occupational therapist or a speech language pathologist. It should, but what they do is they go out and they make up positions that aren't connected to any kind of reasonable degree, certification, licensure, anything like that, which means that they're sort of free floating out there, not attached to any kind of ethical requirement that a parent could sit there and review and digest and hold people accountable to. So they make up these positions. Behavior specialist or whatever. And in many situations, what I see school districts do is dilute the effectiveness of their behavior analysts by not calling them behavior analysts. I can't imagine, being that these people are required to receive a license with very specified ethics and very specified roles based upon science, and they just dilute their value by calling them, the behavior specialist for the district instead of a licensed behavior analyst or a board certified behavior analyst, which I think is ridiculous. It'd be like calling an occupational therapist who has a license and similar, or not similar requirements, but also ethical requirements and, attached to their license, to sit there and dilute them by calling them an occupational person. Well, that doesn't denote who they are and what their requirements are and what they had to do to achieve that. Same thing, speech language guy, speech language lady, speech language pathologist. That's their title, that's their role, that's their licensure. So, but I see that all the time. I see these, where I sit there and go, we need a behavior. Oh no, this person is a behavior analyst. Well, why aren't you calling them that? But, that's one of the frustrations within the school. But what I see is that a school system will entertain a parent request, but what they'll do is they'll notate it either in the meeting minutes that never find their way into the body and substance of the IEP, to where, the parents made these requests, it's notated over here, so therefore the parents under the false impression that if they discussed it in the IEP meeting, that somehow it's that they agreed to it over here. And then it takes the parents another, let's say, 3 months to sit there and figure out that they got hoodwinked. That in reality, yes, it's in the IEP minutes, but it never got translated into actual services and a commitment by the IEP team in the IEP itself. Then I have other instances to where it's notated within the child profile or the student profile of the IEP, which is better than just in the meeting minutes, but yet don't find their way from the student profile to any connection to the other required sections within the IEP. So yes, I see it here in the student profile. And yes, technically, according to the regulations, the stuff entered into the child profile need to have a direct correlation with the other aspects of the IEP. You just can't add stuff to the to the student profile and then not take those things and make them applicable in some other aspect or multiple aspects of the body of the IEP itself. But that's a game many schools will play. That, we'll put it in the student profile, but then not put it anywhere else. And once again, parents that aren't that aware, which is one of the reasons I created this group, is to raise the understanding and the knowledge of the parents. There must be a correlation with what's written in the student profile to the other parts of the IEP. That is in the rules. That's in the IDEA, guys. It can't be here and not be here somewhere else. But that's where I see the disconnect. And it doesn't matter. It could be ABA therapy. It could be an increased time in speech language. It could be saying that my child, that the parent has concerns that the child has dyslexia and a need for a specialized individualized reading program, where it's specified in the student profile, but then it just sort of is a slow fart somewhere else. It doesn't exist. I just realized that sometimes I just start thinking and then I start speaking Italian. So I do apologize. I just realized I used some of my colorful type of descriptions, and I've never asked permission to do that. Okay. See, now I lost my train of thought because I said slow fart. Okay. So that is one of the things that you need to be mindful of is that there needs to be that correlation. And so, in my example of the ABA therapy, I see that as something that the parents requested. But then I also see it, sometimes not even transferred, nothing, no reference to it at all. Or what I see is that the parents are asking for ABA therapy, and then other places I see them say ABA strategies, which are not the same thing. The parent is asking for this, and the school is taking that spectrum of applied behavior analysis and saying strategies is the same as therapy. It's not. It's not all the time. And so this is where you need to take that extra step, guys, and ask follow-up questions to clarify that what you're asking for is, let's say if you're asking for ABA therapy, is it discrete trial training? You need to know the difference between the therapies and the strategies and the approaches, because they're all different and they all have names. And they all have very clear distinctions in their purpose. And it is possible to have a child require, let's say, discrete trial training, and but then also the strategies that come along with it. But you can't necessarily say, well, we're going to incorporate all these strategies when you know that the child needs that therapist or teacher directed or initiated approach of discrete trial. So that's what I see. I don't see them in conjunction in a lot of these IEPs. I see them as sort of the standalone, we're adopting the strategies. We're using the word ABA. We're putting strategy next to it. And, and then the parent goes, oh, I got ABA for my kid. And then I have to be the jerk to sit there and say, no, you're not getting it. No, they hoodwinked you. Got to ask follow-up questions. You got to be better at being able to say, what is it that you're defining as ABA? And you as a parent, you need to get in the habit of asking that. And any of you out there that are case managers for your school or a special education director, please, for the love of Moses, ask the follow-up questions so that you understand exactly what it is that the parent is asking for. So that a problem like this doesn't come up and smack you in the behind later on when the parent ends up finding out that what they asked for, or what in their perception they thought they asked for, and how you interpreted it were not the same thing. Because at that point, the parent is going to think to themselves that you deceived them. It's going to destroy trust on the IEP team. It's going to potentially turn into a complaint, either a state complaint, a mediation request, OCR complaint, or a due process complaint using me. So how do you avoid James Galini showing up and whacking you for something that, in my viewpoint, completely avoidable with the right kind of communication, follow-up questions, and clarifying. That's how you do it. But I can tell you right now that what I don't like are these subtleties to where I notate that the parent's making these requests. It doesn't translate because, quite frankly, you're in violation of the rules because you did not address the parent request. You just ignored it. You just brushed over it because you didn't add it to the substance of the IEP. You notate that the parent asked for it. But if you're not going to adopt it or consider it as an IEP team, for God's sakes, have the gumption and the guts to properly follow the rules by providing a prior written statement, prior written notice, explaining why you're not going to do it. Don't sit there and act deceptively that, we're just going to listen to you and we're going to pretend as though we heard you, and we're going to pretend as though we acknowledge you and that we think that's a great idea, and there was a lot of head shaking and smiles, but then never finding its way into the substance of the program. Because in my viewpoint, that's the same as a rejection. You just didn't have the guts to sit there and tell the parent that. And what you did is a clever way of kicking the can down the road to where you've eaten up an entire school year for this child, that their FAPE, that child's FAPE, is connected to the tangible progress according to their abilities. See, that's the thing, guys. There's a kicker in there when it comes to Andrew F. as our new analysis for what a free appropriate public education is, because it's per the abilities of that particular child, okay, which is different than Raleigh. The Raleigh standard was different. Andrew F., I think, is more equitable in being able to do an analysis based upon that child's abilities. Okay, so let's say that this child has behaviors and low skill acquisition. Well, if you're sitting there just instructing them as a typical child or another child that, let's say, has developmental disabilities, but is higher or moderately impacted, not, let's say, moderately impacted or severely impacted, that is a different consideration, because their individualized approach to learning and the science based upon how they can learn and how they can progress tangibly is going to be connected to that teacher or therapist or paraprofessional directed repetitious rote learning that would be encased in something like discrete trial training. And if you're not doing that, then you're not teaching the child according to their abilities and what they're capable of doing, to where you can definitively show tangible progress. And that's where schools are putting themselves between a rock and a hard place, especially during this COVID season, where so many schools decided they were just going to go virtual. Well, you're on the hook for these kids that are moderately to severely impacted. And I feel no pity for you schools that decided to sit there and stay virtual for the majority of the school year, because you knew damn well that these children do not learn that way. You knew that virtual wasn't the way that you could meet that Andrew F. standard. You knew that. You know that now. And so parents asserting their rights to recover those services are absolutely justified. And if that means that you guys have to come out of pocket and use some of that COVID relief money that is still sitting out there, billions of it that the schools haven't used, well, you need to start forking that over so parents can go out and get those services through, let's say, a licensed behavior analyst, or in ways that would result in tangible growth to try to make the gains that they lost because of the decisions of the school. Because very few schools were actively prohibiting schools from going back into session. These were choices made by boards of education, and a lot of them boards of education with the undue influence of the union, threatening, of course, which I don't like that, but I don't, I would expect the union to fight for their members. And their members are teachers. Their members are not children. Children to a union are a secondary concern. Before I became an attorney, guys, I belonged to a union because I worked for an airline. And, the concern wasn't the airline. The concern was me. I was a dues-paying union member. So, and sometimes the advocacy on the part of the union for the employees run in direct contradiction to the health of the company. And that's why some of these companies end up going bankrupt or out of business, because of that lack of clarity on the part of the union to sort of understand that they're pushing too much. And I think that at the end of this COVID experience, we're going to find out that the teachers union pushed too much and did more damage to the public education sector than they possibly could fathom, because they basically made all of teachers look non-essential. Whereas before COVID, we all believed that education was essential and that it's a right. The unions have helped dispel that rumor, and you guys are not essential. According to them, you're not essential. You are not essential workers. You are non-essential workers. I didn't do that. All right? And does that mean that that is my personal opinion as James Galini? No, it doesn't. I'm telling you what the perception that's been put out there. So there's going to be some, comeuppance, if you want to use that term, to undo that. But circling back, that's what you need to be mindful of when you're looking at your IEP, when you're making these requests as a parent. Communication is key. And then being mindful that whatever's written here must be written somewhere else. The services section of the IEP, the supplemental aid and services section, the accommodations section, in special instructional factors section. I mean, I could say in the goals, all of these things, because they're all connected and related to the student profile. And if they're writing crap in the minutes, well, you didn't bring this stuff up for your health, did you? So if you're discussing these things in your IEP minutes, then it needs to be addressed in the IEP itself, or the school needs to sit there and just have the guts to say, yeah, we're not entertaining that, and then provide you a prior written notice telling you why they're rejecting your request. Okay? I hope this helped. Let's raise the bar of our understanding so that we can navigate this process and avoid future issues.